All right, so I'm going to call the meeting to order at 6:03. And just in case you missed it, but I think most of us know, we have a new minute taker. So Liz, you're off the hook. We have a minute taker right here in the room with us. So Liz is like, woo! Liz is so happy. All right. So everybody say hello to Vicky, our new minute taker. All right. And before we get started, I have an executive session to add at the beginning of the meeting. It's under VS Title 1, VSA 5313A1F, attorney-client communication. And we have Dina online, so she'll be joining us, and Patrick will be joining us. But in order to go in, we have to first determine that speaking about this in public session would put us at a disadvantage, and then we'll need a motion to go into executive session. So
I wonder if that should include Floyd as well.
oh, okay, we can include Floyd.
I move that this will put us at a disadvantage.
Second.
All right. So,
Sorry,
Any- Krista, second. All right. All right, any discussion? All right, Dina has an update on the Lincoln exit agreement, and since we're not fully disclosing some of the details of that yet in public session, that's where the disadvantage kind of comes to us. All right, so all those in agreement that speaking about this topic in a public session would put the district at a disadvantage, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Then we'll need a motion to go into executive session and invite Patrick, Floyd, and Dina.
Excuse me, Don, were we gonna do public comment first and then go in that way?
I wasn't
Typically at the start of the meeting, right?
right, but we've added something. Don't know. It's up to.
Is that,
It's pretty short.
if you say it, you'll leave? Is it, you want to leave?
Do you want to leave?
I think
No,
that you're
let me
asking.
clarify. Are you going to stay for the whole meeting? Or are you just here for public?
I was here to make a public comment, recognizing that then you have at least one or two executive sessions coming up. So
Well, there may be somebody else online who wants to speak as well.
All right, so we'll do public comment first and then we'll go into. All right, Sarah, we'll go with you
Okay.
first in the room.
And to this point, I debated whether or not to say anything tonight, to speak tonight, because you as the board have been really generous with your time in the past few weeks. As we work together to make plans for an outside evaluation of safety practices in our district. And we, MAEA, very much appreciate having been given the opportunity to share our concerns about the process. Nonetheless, I think it's important to keep you updated on the climate at our school. I want to make you aware that during the month of January, there have been attacks on staff, intentional attacks on staff by students with injuries resulting. In addition, a small number of students has damaged classroom materials and made threats to nearby students and staff. Some of the affected students who witnessed this have expressed their fear and reluctance to come to school. So unfortunately, things have not yet improved at VES. And I just ask, please keep this information in mind as you discuss our safety grievance in executive session tonight. Do you want to copy for our note taker?
Yeah, you could just leave it here and I'll
Sure.
pass it along.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sarah Mangini. I also debated whether or not to introduce myself for the fourth time. Sarah with an H, Mangini, Mangini.
MEA.
Yeah, co-president of the Mount Abraham Education Association, MAEA. So I can send that her way. Thank you.
We have another board member online, Brad Johnson. All right, online, do we have any public comment online? You raise your electronic hand. All right, I'm not seeing any, so that we'll move into executive session. Is there a motion to go into executive session?
So moved.
Steve,
Second.
Krista, we're gonna invite Dina, Patrick, and Floyd. All right, all those in favor of going into executive session at 6:08, please say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? All right, so this meeting will just hang and the people in
You wanna
this
shut the
room,
doors then?
well, we're gonna have to, because we have so many online, I think we're gonna have to move to bring your coat. We're gonna have to move to the campfire room. For our regularly scheduled meetings. All right, so we're gonna move down to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? So moved, Krista. Krista, one second. Bailey, second. All right, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? I'm seeing thumbs online. That motion passes. All right, executive limitations monitoring report A1 and A2 update. The financial report was included in your packet. Are there any questions? No, I'm not seeing any. Okay. All right, we'll keep moving along then. Under board management and governance, we have A3, A4, action to approve and authorize the board chair to sign the financial management questionnaire.
So moved, Krista.
Crystal,
Second, Sarah.
all right, any discussion? Krista,
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you can take a minute to explain what that is briefly to our new board members.
Floyd, want to walk them through the financial management questionnaire? What it is and why we have it?
Is the question line by line or just a?
What it is and why we have it.
No.
It is effectively a questionnaire that gives you confidence that we have checks and balances in place for both audit and safety reasons, for avoiding any type of opportunities for individuals to be siloed in process and procedure, which would allow for the opportunity to
Misbehave.
nefarious actions.
It's also required by the AOE, right?
It is required.
The Agency of Education.
any
Did
questions?
that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else? All right. All those in favor of approving and authorizing the board chair to sign the financial management questionnaire, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? All right, that passes. Sure. Would you mind, since our student rep was waiting, that we just check in now rather than wait till we get a little further on? Do you mind if we?
Great idea.
All right. Izzy's here. Welcome back again.
Thank you.
Sorry you had to wait.
Okay. And I sent her a note saying that this is a standing agenda item for our once a month meeting. And so it's a chance to just hear community council's perspective on what's happening at Mount Abe, and we can ask questions of them or of her representing them. So I just told Izzy about this tonight, so it's okay if you don't actually have anything to report, but if you want to share some of what you guys have been doing, go for it.
Yeah, we haven't actually had a meeting in about 2 weeks due to assemblies and just being busy. So we're a little out of sync with our group right now. We have a meeting this Friday. If anyone wants to attend, we are open to the public. We've basically been discussing just student clubs right now has been a main topic. We get people come to us and we talk about their clubs and pass their clubs. It's right now we've just been trying to get it up and running again.
Any questions?
And I think you said that, the group would be willing to have people participate by Zoom.
Yes, we.
So I think you had asked about that and you had asked about that. So it's at 2:15 on Fridays,
Yeah, it's at
right?
2:15 during our fit block. So it's at,
So is there, do you think Miss Norwood would be the person to be able to send
Yeah.
a link to folks?
yes,
Okay, so maybe,
I can also send a link if I get names. I don't
yeah,
know
or
names.
even if, can send it to the whole board.
Yeah.
I don't know if have all of our email addresses yet. So for right now, if you want to just send it to me, I
Yeah,
can pass it on to everybody.
And that was Friday at 2:15.
To 2:47.
And the name of the club is?
It's community council.
It's the Mount A high school.
Yeah.
Sorry, one more thing. And as we go, we'll try to speak the acronyms instead of to speak out the full name of what it is and explain a little bit of what we're doing. But if folks could just be thinking about that too, that would be great.
Yeah.
Liz has her hand.
Oh, Liz.
Hi, did you mention the $10,000 that you guys are brainstorming for what to do for the school?
I have not mentioned, we have talked about it as a group, as a community council group, and we're right now thinking about beautifying the school. Flowers, we're thinking maybe little trees, just make it a little more inviting, the school campus.
Thanks for being on the spot. Being willing to speak up.
Thank you.
Right. All right, so our next action item, if we hop back up to B, is to adopt the FY24 school budget.
All right, I'll share my screen and
So,
walk you through updates from last time.
because we usually need an amount in there when we adopt the budget. We don't usually get very specific about the number.
In the, right, so by adopting the budget, that provides the number that goes in the warning.
So. And for everyone to know, the warning and the ballot, we're gonna need you to table that because we have things still that are not finished and decided, so that will be tabled tonight. And taken up at another meeting.
But there are some decisions within this budget presentation that will inform what goes on that ballot, which will be helpful. Okay. So we always like to start with assumptions. Let me get rid of. So most of these assumptions are the same as last time we met. So the same assumed percent increase in the healthcare. The reduction in equalized pupils is greater. So we actually lost more equalized pupils in the most recent version that we got from the Agency of Education. So our sort of natural decline that we've been experiencing in addition to Lincoln's withdrawal effectively gives us that 216.9 drop in equalized pupils. We did get, since last time we met, we did get some new information around CLAs. The CLAs were actually lower a little bit than what our assumptions had been. So that has an impact on the tax rate. And I'll there's a slide later that shows you the changes since last time and what the tax impact is of those changes. Nothing has changed with the yield since last time. Again, there's no spending threshold that we're calculating here. Revenue is the same as last time, and the same assumptions around the sort of personnel impact of the Lincoln withdrawal. So most of those assumptions the same as before.
Good.
Sure.
To be asked questions as we go. So at one point, you were taking a conservative stance with the staff at Lincoln, which is, I guess, the same thing here. Is there any sort of rumblings or anything as to
Plenty of rumblings,
what
yes.
we think might happen there?
Yeah, again, nothing that we could hold anybody accountable to right now. It does sound like most people are interested in staying with Lincoln. That won't be confirmed until contracts are issued. Everything we're hearing right now is Lincoln is expecting to offer contracts late February, early March, which is about a month ahead of our timeline. So presumably folks that are currently at Lincoln are going to be off, at least the ones that Lincoln School District wants to retain, are going to be offered a contract, and those folks will have to make a decision. For the vast majority, if they accept a contract with Lincoln, then they're resigning all or part of their position with MAUSD. There's some complicated folks that are shared between Lincoln and other schools. I've started having some conversations with those folks to try and get a sense of what their thinking is right now. Again, nothing I could hold them to. And so far, most are interested in keeping their sort of shared time with Lincoln and with MAUSD, and they recognize to do so, they'd have to resign from a portion of their time in MAUSD. There are some other folks so thinking about interventionists, special educators, like we have some unfilled needs. So we've made it clear to those folks, if you stay with MAUSD, we're interested in keeping you on at 1.0. You wouldn't have to resign some portion of your job with us. Other folks, that's not the case. Like some other positions, we actually have more FTEs than we need right now, thinking in particular around special areas. So we probably wouldn't be in a position to just absorb more music time, for example. So that would have a different effect on staffing.
So you said something about as Lincoln offers contracts, will they be offering contracts to fewer staff than they're there now? You think? Or?
Yes, everything I've seen so far looks as though there will be fewer FTE at Lincoln Community School next year than there are currently assigned to Lincoln Community School.
But you were taking this approach essentially to be conservative.
Right, exactly. So if we
Because the
assume
people that
everybody
were at
stays
Lincoln were more senior than people you might assume you might reduce here.
with few exceptions, yes.
Right. So this was the conservative approach, and if it doesn't pan out that way, it's really less of an impact.
More savings financially. Yep.
Sarah, did you get yours?
It
Question?
was a little bit along those lines about if you had somebody that was sort of half and half, let's say between two schools, but you're not all that interested in having this person be half-time at MAUSD, can we also just say, if you take their half-time, this probably isn't gonna work out for you here? Okay,
Yeah, we can say our need is 1.0, and if you're not
Okay.
interested in that, then you will have to resign from the position. I think we would be in a position to do that.
but I think I was just clarifying.
In the current work environment,
Yeah.
employment environment, that's not likely to happen,
Okay.
except for those few positions that we're currently sort of overstaffed in. For example, we've reduced some classrooms as we've experienced enrollment decline. We haven't figured out how to sort of make that same move in the special areas. And the number of PE classes you have drives how many PE FTE you need. So in that example, we wouldn't absorb the PE time at Lincoln if that PE teacher wanted to stay, because we're already overstaffed in that area.
Okay.
And that would have, a negative impact on the financial situation for us. So again, those conversations are underway, trying to get a sort of a pulse on folks. And frankly, it was helpful to share with folks the sort of risk benefit analysis that they need to do as they're thinking about that. There's less protection presumably in a smaller district. If you're the only PE teacher and they make a reduction in PE, it's pretty clear where that reduction is coming from. If you're one of 7 PE teachers and there's a reduction in PE, well, 6 of those 7 aren't going to be impacted in terms of a reduction. So having some of those conversations, I think, have been helpful just as folks wrestle with what makes sense for them to do. So these are the changes since the December budget that you saw. There has been an increase in expenses of a little under 300,000. That's a combination of a couple of things. There's a student tuitioned out of district that was not captured in the prior at 208,000. And in continuing the work with folks at Moncton, in particular, Principal at Moncton, Mike, trying to figure out what to do with some sort of bubbles they have floating through. We've talked some at some board meetings about the challenges with that. To give you a sense, yesterday, Katrina and I met with Mike, and he was projecting 21 incoming kindergarten. Today, that number is now 25. I just got a text before coming to this meeting. So an incoming K of 25, first grade of, I think, 17, 18, 19, and second grade next year at 27. So those are some of the bubbles we're trying to figure out how to manage with numbers, and having one more classroom teacher there, probably focused on the primary end, gives us a little bit of latitude to try and figure out how to manage those numbers.
For the out of district tuition expense, is that 1 year of tuition cost?
1 year, one student.
Can you share if that is an elementary or a secondary student?
Secondary. So those are the added expenses from the last version that you saw. The tax impact is a little under 2 cents for that one piece. I mentioned the reduction in equalized pupils that we just recently received from the AOE, Agency of Education. That reduction is 4.31. That impact is a little over half a penny on the tax rate. And then I mentioned that the CLAs actually came in. If you remember, we had made an assumption of a decrease in the CLAs, common level of appraisal, and they came in, depending on the town, anywhere from 1% to 2% lower than what we were projecting. And that's another a little under 2.5 cents on the tax rate, for a total that you can't see, a little under 50 cents. 5 cents, sorry.
Sorry, can I just ask another question about the out of district tuition? Do we get reimbursed for any of that?
So yes, there is, the funding is changing starting
Right.
next year.
The block.
So we get a block grant, and there is still an allowance. And Floyd, you can check me on this because we're still working on understanding this together. There is an allowance for extraordinary costs. The threshold for when the extraordinary costs kick in has increased. It was, I think, 50,000. Now it's 65 or 64 and change. So the answer is yes, but not as much as we would have once received. They essentially get
It's
that.
pretty accurate, and this is a number with our best guess net.
So this is with the
Oh.
reimbursement. I was gonna say, otherwise, it's not as bad as this, but it's.
No,
No, it's worse than.
and so
The real
then
cost is greater.
my next question is related to conversations we had at the last meeting about increasing capacity at the secondary level for out of dish, for in-district intensive. Is this type of scenario a scenario that might be in the future served in that expanded program?
That is the idea, and you can see, the cost. And now, this is a little higher than normal cost, I would say, for an out-of-district placement. Like this, I would say, reflects pretty intensive needs. But numbers are, the average would be quite high, north of 100,000. And so that is the intent. We talked about adding $200,000 to expand that. It's the Addison Consortium Project, ACP, to support 6th through 8th grade, in addition to what we already have in place to support 9-12. The idea is that we can start, instead of out of district tuitioning to much higher expense places that are further away, which also has an impact on the student and family, that we can bring some of these students in closer to home and provide equally or better services closer to home at same or reduced costs. Sort of the big idea for me.
It's accelerated in that we struggle to get contracted services capacity
To
to come
support,
here
um,
to support.
Yes. Believe it or not, we feel fortunate when we have someone that will accept that kind of money to help a student that we're struggling to meet their needs.
The way.
Yeah. And so some of this is also growing our internal capacity to meet needs when we have wait lists. And I was just on a call yesterday afternoon with Champlain Valley legislators. So Champlain Valley superintendents met with Champlain Valley legislators to
Yeah.
advocate first and foremost for helping our partners in our communities, which is both our mental health agencies, but also the the schools that help meet these kind of extreme needs, so that when we say we need help, they say we're here for you, as opposed to what's happening right now. We say we need help and they say we wish we could.
And then.
And in the meantime, the students coming to our school every day.
And not getting the education they really need because we can't do it.
Yeah, despite our best efforts, Herculean at times.
So I'm totally in the dark as to, can you give some examples of the types of schools these students would go to without divulging personal information?
Yeah, I think, and I couldn't tell you where the student is right now anyway. Some of the names of schools, so Baird is one that is pretty common. That's part of the Howard Center. What's that?
Jean Garvin.
Jean Garvin is one. There are some out of state. I'm blanking on their names.
Is Brattleboro Retreat.
And I think it's
Brattleboro
important,
Retreat, a little different at Mosaic. Yeah.
you've got the cost to get into the school. And then the services that are required beyond what the school provides is then charged too.
And typically, if it's a day program, you can add $40,000 for transportation for that one student to and from over the year.
So if that student has occupational therapy, then, and that school doesn't provide it, but it's in their IEP, then you have to pay your person to go up there, plus travel, plus their hourly rate.
Yep.
That kind of stuff.
If you can find OT, PT, or SLPs,
Yes.
occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech language pathologists.
I appreciate that you're part of advocacy at the legislative level.
See where it goes. There are a lot of people that want money from the legislature.
Yeah,
so-
I'm sure.
And there's not a big pool to go around. And 'tis the season for advocacy, right? So
Yeah.
the session's just getting started, so we try to kind of get everybody while they're fresh. Twice in the last week, I've been advocating in different settings with state or regional legislators. And there will likely be opportunities for testimony in the future as things kind of get rolling. So there's plenty of opportunity in addition to sort of the local, more one-on-one conversations with legislators. So a little bit of a burn walk, but those are the changes since the last time you saw this budget. The projected fund balance is, again, this is not, so we're having issues with our audit. Well, you can talk more about that if you want to hear about it. We do not yet have an audit. But this is an unaudited fund balance right now. Floyd and his team feel pretty confident in this. It's a little less than what you saw last time. But they're feeling pretty good about it. And it is unaudited at this point. We're still recommending that you take this entire fund balance and put it into the capital reserve.
To this number, the audit is not finished, so we don't have an audited number. This particular piece has been reviewed.
So we won't run into the issue we had last year with the 16,000 that was.
I make no promise.
Okay.
So these figures were updated as of 4 o'clock today, but not 4:15 today when I got the message from Mike about the 4 more students that he just learned about. So it's a little off already. No real substantive change here from what we talked about last time. Most notably, a slight bump at Beeman, as they had a really small 6th grade class that'll be going to 7th grade next year. That's being replaced with a larger than average incoming kindergarten, at least as we're expecting right now. Bristol also has a little bit larger than normal incoming K. We talked about Moncton, which actually is a little higher than what this shows. Robinson is where we're seeing the drop, and then again at Mount Abe, which again, we've been forecasting all along that the drop we've seen through the elementary schools in recent years is going to start working its way through Mount Abe. So we'll expect that that number to continue to go down a little bit over the coming years. In terms of what that means for class sizes, so this slide reflects a few different things. We added a teacher at Beeman this year using ESSER. Given the incoming K and the configuration challenges at Beaman, the plan is to keep that added teacher, so they would have 5 classroom teachers next year. And you can see what right now the projected average class size at the K2 and 3-6 levels would be, and then sort of overall for the school. We also added a K teacher at Bristol this year with what was expected to be a larger than normal incoming K that didn't materialize. However, we're again, as I said, looking at we're expecting a larger than normal, somewhere between 45 and 50 students incoming K at Bristol. So this assumes we retain 3 kindergarten teachers for a second year in anticipation of that. Moncton, the 23-24 projected, those figures include that added teacher that we just talked about. And you can see overall that still keeps the numbers pretty much in line with where the other schools are, which again, this doesn't reflect the added 4. So it's actually probably even more in line than what this shows right now. And then those figures at Robinson show an actual reduction of a classroom at Robinson. And you can see their numbers are still, especially in the primary end, lower than anywhere else. But overall as a school, they're sort of right in the range of everybody else. See how many different places I can put this, or maybe out of the way. Any questions there? So this was just sort of in for reference again. What you saw for the averages is quite in line with what you're seeing here. In some of the cases we're just on the lower end of that optimal average, thinking about the 13.33 at Robinson in the primary. So that's obviously just under the 14. If we removed a teacher there, it goes up to 20. So then we're going to be just over what we'd be looking for in that K2. So rather than have them lose 2 classroom teachers in 1 year, to make the reduction of 1 next year, let's see what FY25 brings for incoming kindergarten and see if that warrants 1 more reduction or not. So it made sense to kind of let that slightly lower average in K2 ride at Robinson.
And Patrick, for Bailey and Kristen's benefit, this comes out of the AOE's guidelines to begin with, and then the board sort of adopted something in our, is it in a policy or?
So these are the sort of board adopted MAUSD class size guidelines.
Right.
So these, yeah.
But they're based on something that the AOE published.
Yep. So Don was talking about the number before, right? So you have to put a number on the ballot, and that is the budget. And that number that goes on the ballot is that top number, 32,970, 32,970,835. This assumes that we don't put any money in for the capital. So that's one of the decisions that the board's going to have to make tonight is you have 2 versions of the budget. You don't have to go with one or the other. There's plenty of room in between if that's where you want to go, but to give you sort of the bookends, this version doesn't add any money to cover the cost of a potential future bond or just more money for capital needs in the event we can't secure a bond. And I'll show you a version that does include that. And as you can see, without the 900,000 that we would add for a bond, we're just under 12% increase in the cost per equalized pupil. Typically, in years past, on this slide, you would see the last 5 years or so of what our total expenses have been, the revenue, et cetera. So you can see the trend. We don't really have an apples to apples anymore because this is without Lincoln. All of our historical numbers would show with Lincoln. So it doesn't paint an accurate picture. So that's why you're seeing just the 1 year in isolation. And so understanding so this is what the tax rate would be. You can see before CLA and then applying the CLA and then after. And really what that breaks down to is the impact. So again, about 1/3 of taxpayers pay their taxes based on the value of their home without any income sensitized adjustment. So this is showing for that 1/3 that would pay based on the value of their home. And so for most, it would be, you know, in that as low as $7 up to $28 per 100,000 of assessed value. I have a slide later that will show year-over-year comparisons from a percent increase on the tax rate perspective. To just kind of give you a sense of what have we done historically and where do the two options this year fall, just to give you a basis of comparison to try and help make sense of it all. So this is using the median income for Addison County, what the projection would be for those that pay with the income sensitized version of taxes using that median. So without adding the 900K, we're looking at about a 10% decrease in the tax rate for those folks.
And the reason why that looks so rosy is because the yield is so high.
Correct.
Right.
Yep.
Under sort of a normal, what I would say a normal year, like last year was sort of abnormal, this year's abnormal.
Correct.
Prior to that, we would probably be looking at at 12%, a pretty significant tax increase.
12% from a cost per pupil standpoint, 12%. I think the highest we've had in recent years since we've merged is around 8%, 8 point something. I don't remember exactly what it was. So 12% is a fair bit higher than the highest we've had prior.
Yeah.
It's fair. And so the two things, the driving force here is the positive yield. What's offsetting that a little bit is the pretty significant drop across the board in the CLA.
Right.
So there's a little bit of an offsetting factor there, but the yield's positivity is much greater than the negativity of the CLA. So we've still been paying attention to the spending threshold because that may become very relevant again at some point. What you see here shows that we would still, with the expected big jump in the spending threshold of 11.1, and we're not making that up. That's an actual figure that we get from the AOE that says if we had a threshold, it would have gone up this much. So we would still, the spending would still be under that threshold. As a sort of primer for a future conversation, you're going to see this exact slide again relative to the budget that has an increase of 900,000. It's exactly the same because the assumption is that that's paying for bond principal and interest.
So it's not.
And it doesn't count against us in terms of the spending threshold. So our position in both of these scenarios, assuming we pass a bond, is the same relative to the spending threshold.
What are
Which one are
the
we?
drop is, you want to explain the acronym?
Sure. So, so the drop as we move to long-term weighted ADM, average daily membership. So currently, the spending threshold is calculated on our equalized pupil count. And so again, an equalized pupil is the state's attempt to recognize that different students with different needs cost different amounts to educate. And so they apply a weight to various things. Like if a student is eligible for free reduced lunch, there's a weight applied so that that student is worth sort of counted as more than a student that doesn't have that need. And it's to reflect the added support that we tend to see for students that are eligible. Students in IPs, students that speak English as a second language. There's a new formula that's at play that also accounts for something called rurality. So it looks at how densely populated your area is. If your school's small, you get a sort of different weight than if your school's larger. So those are all some of the examples of the factors. But we're moving away from equalized pupil formula as part of the weighting study. If you remember, we've been talking about that for a long time. Well, the result of the weighting study is this move to long-term weighted ADM, or average daily membership, which is a different way to count students. So now they're looking at, is it a 2-year average still? From October 1st to October 10th. So that 10-day window, they look at the actual number of kids each day that show up in your building. So if a kid's out sick a day, your ADM is down. So we want healthy kids for those 10 days to start October. Because that's gonna increase our average daily membership and therefore really either increase our spending capacity or decrease what the tax rate would be, depending on what you decide to do with that.
That 10-day window is the same structure under the equalized pupil. And generating the numbers for that.
So it's a different way to count students and account for variations in levels of support for students and the costs associated with those. And the reason you see the dip in FY24 in the blue is because our ed spending goes down because we don't have Lincoln. So again, it's sort of a reset for us. But the importance here is that you see the red line would be our trend line, would be the spending threshold. And the blue is what anticipated spending would be relative to that. So you can see we're essentially at the spending threshold now and going forward based on what you're seeing.
Patrick, can you either remind us or tell us, if you haven't really articulated, what the primary cost containment measures are that we took in this year's budget?
Primary cost containment measures.
So in other words, like,
Where did you cut?
where did you cut? Yeah, thank you. What's the, what are the biggest places where we are knowing that there's 12% increase in health insurance and knowing we want to add money in for intensive programming for middle school kids and all that.
Right.
So, and we're losing students where,
So the only reduction this reflects is a reduction of one classroom teacher at Robinson.
so our budget next year, the only reduction is in that one place.
And that's a teacher who's currently in a 1-year position. So there isn't a RIF that will happen to achieve that.
And that's probably plus or minus whatever's gonna happen with the Lincoln Exchange.
Exactly. There's definitely a plus or minus there that's hard to
Just
really
to
get our finger on right now.
try to realign.
I would also say there are positions going forward that we intentionally didn't fill, that we're intentionally not filling going forward. So
Is there
There's
any
some of
other, anything else besides staffing? Like I know the state extended universal,
yeah, so that doesn't yet have a cost. So the universal meals
yeah. we're
isn't
still-
built in. There's no added cost for that right
So
now.
we're still continuing that next
Mhm.
year. So no other besides that one staffing big areas where we,
Correct. And this is, I think what we had talked about in prior meetings is in light of, so knowing what we know now about some big decisions that would have made some pretty significant staffing, staffing and cost implications. We know now that in addition to the work that we're doing around the cost-effective mindset work and some staffing work that we have to do, we also know we're going to have to tackle the challenges at the middle high school and the low enrollment and what that means. Like we've done a lot at the elementary level as the enrollment decline has been experienced. We've been holding off at Mount A because often reducing staff there means reducing programming, and that has an impact on what we offer our students. We pursued the merger as a way to reduce staff without reducing programming. That didn't fly. So we're kind of back at this place of we still have the declining enrollment that we're going to see move through Mount A. We still have financial pressures we have to realize. We just have to find different ways to navigate that, which is some combination of reducing staff and therefore likely programming and increasing budgets. Those are the sort of the two options we have.
There are opportunities that we can't quantify today. You know, we met with Vermont Gas about switching over Beaman because Vermont Gas is there, and we think we could recognize as much as a 30% reduction in cost there. When we can get that done becomes a question, and there's a cost to convert that we're looking at ESSER funds, excuse me, as an opportunity to do that. But if we can't use ESSER funds, then being able to make that conversion for that savings that we'll recognize in 25, 26, and going forward. We see efficiencies coming. And talk to your towns about getting Vermont gas, Burlington, CBU, almost $1 million a year savings in their fuel consumption.
Because you're projecting somewhere around a 30% reduction.
30% reduction of cost.
But in terms of these maneuvers that we might need to make it on aid, that's not projected for this budget.
No, this was, I mean, there really wouldn't be time right now to have done that work following the November vote and make lots of those decisions and have to build this budget. So we know, and I've been in conversations with Shannon, work going forward is to map out what that could look like.
Hi.
What's palatable or not, there are a lot of conversations there that need to be had in terms of what's palatable in terms of budget increases and palatable in terms of programmatic decreases.
Yeah, I think that we should, as a board, be thinking about how we want to engage the community around that conversation. So that's going to be really important.
Well, there's other handful of topics that probably pop up in that regard as well, like the 6th grade maneuver.
Yeah.
Those are the things that were on Nate's list.
Agreed.
That we're not, essentially what we're saying is we're not, this doesn't reflect any of those. We're not tackling those this year.
Exactly.
There's not a
Done
need to
enough.
tackle them this year.
Well, I guess that's a matter of perspective. When you're looking at the cost per pupil increases that we're looking at, one could argue we should be, but this budget does not reflect that.
Right. We're not standing on the edge of a cliff.
Right.
Not
Could.
today.
From a tax
We're
rate
standing on a
impact,
cliff in terms of a date to set a budget.
right. But frankly, the yield helped by some of that time in terms of how people are going to feel it on their taxes. So
It's
we
the
should,
same scenario we've been in the last couple of budget cycles. The state has suddenly given us a reprieve.
and then I'd love to think that will happen every year from this point forward. And reality says that's probably unlikely.
And there's another piece to that, that the last few years, we've consistently been given an attractive yield to work with. And then the number comes in better in May.
Mhm.
Indications would say that based on the revenues the state is seeing towards the education fund, that pattern has a great opportunity to continue. We can't budget for that. But there is an argument to be made that will continue, and we may not see the same increase in the property tax rate that we're looking at tonight. In the same way, a year ago, we were looking at a tax change and then came in with a little bit different number come May.
So we're starting now to get into what the budget would look like if we did add the 900,000, which would essentially cover the entire cost of the principal and interest payment on a $9.5-ish million bond, given the list of projects that we've talked about. And we talked about, the smart money from my perspective is still to pass a bond, because you're paying, even with interest rates going up, if we're paying 4% interest on a bond and we get the work done in today's dollars, rather than be subject to the escalation of construction costs, which are much more than 4% a year. It's the smart way to spend money. In the event we can't get a bond to pass, even having a big hole payment already built in the budget, that adds money to our capital construction line, which allows us to tackle some big projects like the roof within one budget cycle. Projects like the electrical main upgrade in one budget cycle. We have some big projects that alone will take multiple years if we stay what our current funding level is. So, and there's risk in taking that long to get some of those projects taken care of. Not the least of which is putting off any other sort of fit and finish upgrades within the buildings, or accessibility upgrades or other things like that. So the other was about 12% increase per pupil with the 900K. We're at about 15.5% increase per pupil. Around the region, it's high, but it's not an outlier. Addison Northwest, last I saw, was still around 19% increase per pupil. Addison Central was coming in around 9 or 10%. Regionally, I think we're seeing a lot of 8 to 12 plus increases per pupil. So there are a lot of districts that are paying close attention to H42. That's waiting for the governor to sign that. Takes away the requirement to articulate their cost per pupil.
So is there going to be any discussion in the warning of the overall change in budget?
No, so the sort of draft language that has been circulating in the warning says essentially, shall the voters of MAUSD authorize the school board to spend 33,868,900, which it is deemed necessary for the operation of the school district. Essentially that.
Or I can just see all the people who are working the polls, trying to answer that question for their calculator.
What's the increase?
Yeah, really. So what's the increase?
I mean, there's nothing saying that we couldn't make sure every town had something that articulated that, right?
And what's required and what's
We can
allowed.
put whatever we want
I think you absolutely
outside
could.
of what's in
Okay,
addition.
yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, because everybody's been used to for so long seeing something.
Something,
I'm a fan of having it be the actual increase in the budget.
right?
Total expenses.
Yeah, total expenses.
That's
but
what it
So,
was,
increase
until
per
they changed
pupil
it to
just-
that.
So
That's why
Now,
conversation is.
Taking both away.
No, I
we leave it
understand. I'm just surprised they didn't have you put something, one or the other.
but the question for us, which is perhaps unique to us, what would you put as the year over year? Like,
Yeah.
hey, we dropped, or we only increased a tiny, like one compares with Lincoln to without Lincoln. So we don't have an apples to apples comparison to make.
True.
Well, even this
Well-
right here. I mean, this is an increase per pupil, I guess, so that's apples to apples, because it's per pupil, no matter what.
Right.
It is and it isn't, because there's an impact of not having Lincoln on the cost per pupil. So it's not exactly apples to apples, but it's the closest we could create for folks.
Think of it at the high school, we get to charge, well, let's make up numbers, $20,000 for tuition. But on an equalized pupil, we get 1.13 of that student. So we don't get the 1.13, but now but we do have income, but it's not the same equivalency as 1.13 of an equalized pupil.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I mean, we're kind of deep in the weeds on that, but
Yeah, no, I
but
understand.
it just gives a.
The per pupil is gonna be weighted differently because of population.
So from these two slides, the big takeaway is 12% increase, 15.5% increase in the cost per equalized pupil. And again, here's the tax rate, but really where this hits home is here. So we were looking at figures in the low to mid $20 per 100,000 before, and now we're looking at sort of 70 to 85, give or take. So a little bit of a difference. And I think the next slide is, okay, so still a decrease for the 2/3 that pay based on income. And again, it's the same reason, right? That having that very favorable yield really helps. And then in turn, so the same slide we saw before, I feel like we've had that conversation. This is another way to look at over time, where we would be relative to percent increases and things. So you can see,
Just going back to your last slide, just to repeat what you said earlier for Bailey and Kristen. When you throw construction dollars into a bond, and I think even throwing construction dollars into a construction budget, assuming that you get prior approval or something for the.
yeah, the process is a little different and it may not be exactly as much as you'd get if it was in a bond, but
You don't
still
have to
help.
count that towards your construction, towards your education spend.
So they don't add it in.
Because
to
it's a
that
capital
pushing up that
expenditure,
threshold.
improving the building, it's not money you're
Education.
directly spending on education.
it really specifically, it doesn't count against you from a spending threshold, spending penalty perspective. It actually still does calculate toward your ed spending, and you have to raise taxes to cover the cost,
Right.
but you're not penalized on it. And this is really looking at how close would we be to that threshold where we begin to be paying a penalty.
Mhm.
Now, again, so you can see we're pretty much right at the spending threshold. If we add $900,000, don't pass a bond, we're give or take $900,000 over the spending threshold. This assumes we get a bond to pass.
Well, unless those construction projects get.
Sure, yeah.
So
Unless you get some forgiveness there, right?
are you talking about voting a bond question this March?
Nope, this would be in anticipation of doing like probably forming a committee, doing a more in-depth study. Figuring out exactly what we'd be looking at. Communicating with the community, there'd be a lot of lead time. This would be a year from now, potentially thinking about a bond vote. Right, and in the meantime, this gives us more operating capital next year to continue to tackle big projects. Like we could get started on something, or depending on what we decide with central office, we'd have some money to do something for that. Like it positions us to get something done next year, and we have to make some decisions on what that something is. Because essentially everything we've been looking at exceeds what we have budgeted currently for construction services.
So potentially next March, you'd be asking for a bond.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it could be next March or next November, or it could be a special election. There's some wiggle room there. Town meeting day tends to be the time to hit people because that's when everybody's showing up and we get the
Yeah.
best representation.
And having it built into the budget, we're not asking him for money.
Because you built in the payment. The 900,000 would be your payment on the bond if they voted for it. So you just pull it out of your budget. And sort of move to that other pot.
I guess where I'm kind of like, my brain is stuck, is if we aren't asking for a bond until, let's say, next March. Then why would we put that payment in now? Would we just spend it this year on something? Is that what you're saying? Like,
Right.
oh, we'll start the roof or do something.
So instead of
Okay.
1.2, which won't cover the cost of a roof, for example, we
Yeah.
have 2.1, which would cover the cost of a roof, or it would cover the cost of renovating a space for central office if that decision is made. It would cover the cost of purchasing the space that we're in. Like it would give us some operating capital to make some decisions and act on them. And either that's the approach going forward. If we don't pass a bond, we would just continue to have more money to be able to tackle these big projects.
Okay.
Or some of that would go to pay for the bond if we can get a bond to pass.
And the advantage is this is leveraging a very favorable yield
Right.
to position us correctly.
Yeah, like if we
To
don't
kind of
have
show
the
people
same
if we
yield
can do
next
it.
year, then might not have this opportunity to
Right.
put
Yeah.
that money.
Right. If we're sitting at
Right,
12%
yeah.
or 14% before we add anything, Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, that we're not, yeah.
and this is the piece then, in terms of how do the two versions of FY24 compare to historical? I think this puts that into perspective. That's useful. So this is looking at the percent increase in the tax rate by town over the past several years. And so you can see last year, because of the very favorable yield, we had much lower than normal tax rate increases, the exception being Starksboro. Starksboro took a big hit last year in the yield. And that's why that rate was higher. CLA. And that's why Starksboro's FY24 is better than everybody else's because they took the hit mostly last year and less so this coming year. But you can see even with the bond, the percent increase in the tax rate is within range, if not a little lower, depending on if you consider FY23 as an anomaly, or if you build that into that's why I thought the two different averages would be helpful.
And I heard on the radio that there's a potential for another appraisal being needed in town sooner because of the housing market. Have we heard anything about our towns and if that's accurate?
I have not heard about any of our towns. I don't know if you've heard, Floyd. I think there are going to be a lot of towns
So-
scrambling to
I think they
reassess.
said like 2/3 of
It's
them. are-
required
Yeah.
to drop below a certain.
If
number.
you
Right.
had a
The issue
single,
is the state doesn't have the capacity to do it. There's not enough appraisers to get all of this done in the windows. So there'll be some sort of a
Grace period or something.
grace period
Okay.
that's gonna have to be worked in.
Bristol is talking about it. I don't know how far along they are.
Sure.
Moncton got their letters. We got a postcard saying it's coming up.
Well, let me go.
Just did it.
Where's your check out? You need an appraisal.
Yeah.
Oh, you're looking.
Yeah.
That's the trick. If you just did it and then property values skyrocket, your CLA is gonna fall and you're gonna get back to a point where it might trigger needing to do it again, even if you did just fairly recently do
Right.
that.
Okay.
So this sort of gives you the side by side of the two
This is the slide
versions.
you want to show everybody for them.
Give you some perspective, you know, our friends in Lincoln are looking at a 12.4% in decrease in their CLA. And that impact, you know, you'll hear that conversation that it's really impacting their budget and tax rate.
Yeah, so that's about
Sorry,
twice,
Patrick.
that's about twice what the other four towns are seeing in terms of a drop. So what I would recommend to the board is that we move forward with that 15.58% increase in the cost per pupil. That's the figure that's much higher than anything else we've put out in the past. The other figures are sort of within reason of what we've seen in terms of percent increases on the tax rates, impact on the taxes. As you saw in both scenarios, for 2/3 of property taxpayers, it's still going to be a reduction in the tax rate. It's only for those that pay based on the value of their home without any income sensitized factor that they're going to see, you know, a slight increase in the version without the 900K and a bit more of an increase in the one that does have the 900K. And as I said before, you know, this is not way out of whack with what we're seeing regionally in terms of increase in the cost per pupil. I think that's the last slide. So in terms of decisions, I think it's which version of the two or somewhere in between, or you know, what's the sort of the board's direction in terms of what number basically goes on the ballot to warn for a budget, knowing the impacts of what those numbers are. Confirming that what we're recommending you do with the reserve in terms of putting it into the capital reserve fund, or the fund balance, I should say, putting that into the capital reserve fund is another important decision. And then there are other warning type of decisions that we'll need to talk through and make some decisions of, or give you some direction on, but they're less related to the budget. I'm happy to go back to any slide to answer questions. And I guess to put it in perspective, 7 years ago, I think, Don, I'm looking to you because I think you're the only one here that was on the Mountie board at the time. We had a similar opportunity to add $1 million to the budget for Mountie specifically. Maybe you're on there. With multiple failed attempts to pass a bond, you know, plan A was always, let's get a bond to pass. That was unsuccessful. Plan B had been, well, not really do anything. We said we can't have plan B continue to be do nothing. So we added $1 million as plan B. I haven't heard anyone regret in looking back that we did that. I think about what we've been able to accomplish, and that has been instrumental. We find ourselves at another point where we have an opportunity to make a real move in terms of addressing facilities without having a dramatic increase in the tax rate for taxpayers. I think it positions us well going forward to take advantage of it.
So if you took, how many years did we have the $1 million line item? It's been 5, 6 years.
5 or 6, yeah.
And it's been static. So if you took,
But we jumped-
Incremental.
We jumped it up to 1.2 just to.
The last couple of years, we tried to start addressing inflation because we realized if we don't,
okay,
we're going to be falling behind.
this isn't really, addresses your question directly, but well, a couple things. One, is there a way that we could, see the projected like percentage tax increase for those along with the, and they showed this to us in other slides, but in one place, you know, the 15.58 increase in cost per pupil, but also the income sensitive and then full payment, sort of, you know, average percentage increase or whatever it is. So that,
Not sure how to do that in one place. But we can maybe sort of skip a bunch of other slides to try and paint that picture a
it
little more
doesn't-
clearly.
yeah, and I don't necessarily need it, I guess. I'll back up by just saying, I think I support this recommendation, but I'm thinking about the communication that we need to have with the community and how we do that. And I think seeing in one place, not just the spending, you know, the increase between the education spending. I don't know, it's late, I'm mumbling, but folks want to know how much their taxes are gonna go up.
Right, and that's
We
what
gotta
I
make
was,
sure that we convey that to people. And
and I think the short story here is, because I think you're right. So the people want to know what's it gonna cost me. That's
bottom line,
the bottom line. With not adding the 900,000, so the delta between not having 900K and having the 900K. For the 1/3 of folks that will pay based on the value of their home, it's gonna cost $50 or $60 more per 100,000. So if you have a $300,000 house, it's gonna cost you $150 to $180 more a year in taxes to
mhm.
cover the 900,000.
Well,
Right, but even if
the income
we-
sensitive people are gonna miss out on $100 worth of tax savings, I think.
Right, so for both of those, in both scenarios, the income sensitized folks, it's a reduction. It's a greater reduction without the 900 and a less of a reduction, but still a reduction with the 900.
Whatever we decide though. And it might be helpful to make the decision for folks to know the difference in the percentages with or without, but whatever we do decide. We need to make sure people can see that change in the percentage of their tax, you know. Their tax rate and not the equalized pupil.
And I did, there's so many different ways you can look at it. I didn't, with this slide, I didn't show the dollars
There you go.
per 100,000 of assessed value. When you're looking at the 8%, like you're looking at north of $150 per 100,000.
Yeah.
Versus the 60 or 70 or 70 or 80, I guess, that we're talking about now. So.
Mm-hmm. And then the other thing I was thinking about, and I know we got an email from a community member about this today, I think, but I was thinking about it anyway, and we need to, and we had many other things, as we always do, going on in the fall, but we have tried to make the fall be about getting input on budget building, and that was missed this year. So I think we need to note that that was missed. So we need to be better about that.
So I'm wondering if we could just pause the money talk for a minute and find out. Does this budget support the strategic plan in a way that you all feel like it's moving us forward? Does it support the ends? Do you feel like it gives you the tools? This budget gives you the tools to maybe make some advancements on those, because I know with the pandemic and everything, things kind of slowed in the strategic plan, so that's really the meat of it. I mean, do you feel like this budget is going to support further movement in those two places?
Yes. And then it gets complicated from there, right? So there's the budget, the money we have to fund a variety of things, mostly personnel. Then there's our ability to secure that personnel. That has an impact on our ability to deliver on the ends and the strategic plan. And then there's our ability to really focus on how we organize the utilization of those personnel toward the ends.
Right. Well, I mean, and as far as community input, when we think about that strategic plan, that had a lot of work and input. It was almost like it did lay out a so many year plan, so. As I guess, knowing that it's still working towards that laid out plan. Where all those people, staff, community members, board members, there was a lot of work put into that.
And to be frank, we need to figure out how to breathe life back into the strategic plan. It had a lot of momentum and then COVID really derailed it, and we need to get that sort of back up and going, and maybe it's sort of version 2.0 because so much time has lapsed.
Well, also, I mean, the potential merger also didn't help. I mean, it's hard to get traction on something we're not sure how it's going to actually. Whether it has any life past the next 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, we had some really big decisions out there that were going to impact what our future looked like that made it hard to do a lot of future planning. A lot of that's behind us now, and
So I think at
Move
Don's
forward.
point, it's really, do you think you have the resources in this budget to move forward with where we thought we were taking this, given not just the strategic plan, but, the realities of all the behavioral things that are going on?
I do.
Yeah, I really like that frame, Don, and I think I remembered that also in the past. And maybe it was an outcome of the community feedback component of the budget building was that you had you made the connection in the budget. Between the areas of the budget and the strategic plan, so I think that would be really helpful to get back to doing as well.
And the community values, I think, were part of that
Yeah,
conversation. as
That's
and
well.
that was
what I
part of the
meant.
input thing as well, because we
Yes.
would do a little input thing in the fall,
Yes,
and then you would
but
link the budget to those items.
because I think in the end, I think we want to support what's going to keep moving that forward.
Any board members online, we can't see you, so you could just
I can
unmic
stop
board
sharing
members
if that's.
if you have questions.
I don't have any yet.
Thanks, Aaron.
Brad still was.
Oh, no, it's not.
It's here.
I didn't see.
Isabella, do you have any questions?
Here's
I know
one,
it's a
right?
lot, but-
No, I don't. I think it is definitely a huge conversation though to discuss for the public, like present it. Even just looking at the slideshow, it's confusing almost without it.
The takeaway is 10,000 of that 33 million is for community council to figure out what. to do.
Yeah, right.
And that's hard enough to do, isn't it?
Yes.
Alright.
Well, I'm also curious, this is sort of jumping ahead, but what do we feel like we want to put on the warning in terms of any additional explanation beyond what the state is asking for? Do we want to just lay the number on them? And like, for why, or do we want to try to give them some sense of what the change value is? And the reason why I bring that up is because under normal circumstances, without Lincoln leaving, we did have some kind of comparative analysis. I would be probably in favor of giving them a total expense delta. Not the per pupil. On the other hand, they've been so used to seeing the per pupil for so long that if people pay attention to that as a year to year sort of thing, that's kind of their measuring stick, like, oh, wow, the last couple of years we've been at X percent, and now all of a sudden we're 15.
I think we start over.
If you just throw 15 down there this year, I think that's a little bit of a tough swallow. Not so much, if we're standing right there next to the person in the ballot box. No, this is good. This is not a problem.
Right.
But this
Or
is
the
just-
1/10 of 1% that come to the annual meeting?
Yeah.
Right?
You know, the people that actually read the flyer, it's hard to understand whether you want to pay attention to the optics of 15% or not. So,
Because you know what's not on the ballot? The tax rate. For people who could actually figure out what does that mean. People assume 15%, that's gonna be a 15% increase in my taxes.
right.
It's not.
Well, that's what I was wondering. Are you not allowed to provide, like, you know, how we have that flyer that we mail out? Are we not allowed to have that at the voting? No. That would be
So many
silly
feet-
to
You
offer
can have
more.
that so many feet away
Right,
from.
you can stand out
building.
across the road.
Across the
from-
road.
Hand them out.
Sarah,
Right, I might have totally missed this, but where is our problem child, our entryway in this? Is that in the budget?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
our
no.
problem
Good
child.
Oh, it's not, it's still not part of that.
That's,
correct. So that's,
separate
that's another
thing.
conversation that needs to inform the warning.
Okay, so that's a different ask from the capital reserve fund. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not included in
And I
that
think
additional piece.
we have the warning item that we can't act on, but there are some warning related topics that are worth conversation that I think may give some direction to me to work with Dina. So when we meet next Monday,
Okay,
so maybe we should.
So the conversation with
direction.
her, from what I understand, was it's better to ask it for it out of the capital than to try to fit it into a budget as a deficit spending.
correct. And she conferred with, gosh, I'm forgetting the name of her partner who does more of this kind of stuff. And between the two of them, where they landed was the best course would be to warn the vote, have the capital, get the permission from the voters to put the capital reserve funds into the operating budget and then expend it to cover the bills.
That,
Okay.
so doing it that way doesn't change like that, the budget, the tax rate, all that.
No, because we're
Okay,
putting capital
We're just
reserves. in.
pushing- okay.
Yeah,
let me make sure. I was
not asking
wrapping my head
taxpayers
around it.
for.
So why are we asking the voters to put money into the capital reserve from the surplus? And then we're gonna ask the voters in the next question to take some money out and put it in the budget. Wouldn't you just
The voters
apply
have to
that?
Direct the surplus.
Exactly.
Oh, they have to direct the
Yeah.
surplus.
So the surplus isn't this year's surplus, it's last year's surplus.
Right.
And the voters have to do something with that.
Okay,
And there's two choices. Put it in a reserve
Overturn.
or return it to offset the tax rate.
Which will change everything.
And if you return it to offset the tax rate, it hasn't gone toward your capital projects.
And it creates the cliff.
Yeah.
When you
Right.
can't put money in. you
Flip
can't
it
dump
back.
okay, so that's how they get permissions, because it's like, you say that the budget here includes this.
Exactly.
All right, and Liz has her hand up.
I would say I support the second version of your budget. I was struggling with the numbers a little bit. And then Don refocused me with your question about the strategic plan. And that was really valuable for me because it pulled me back out to the big picture. About the overall goals that we have for the district as a whole. So that was really nice. And I would support, I know we're not in this conversation yet, but I think that struggle of seeing the per pupil spending being up to 22 around there. I think it's important for people to see that and to feel that and to have that struggle, because that is what I'd like to kind of share that with our community when we share that reality with our community when we even though I realize that it's not necessarily representative, considering that so many other things are built into that cost, it's still how it splits out. When we talk, if we consider moving sixth graders, or if we consider the other savings for looking at the high school staffing, when we're talking about projects, I think that is a valuable number to share with the community, and for them to kind of share that struggle with us about understanding the reality, right? Like it just feel it is striking, and it's an important thing to think about when we consider even the bond and how that fits into the big picture and all of that. So that's all. I support the second version, and I like how it sets us up for the following year. And yeah, I just appreciate your time, and thank you for the presentation.
Kevin.
So I, just to follow on with Liz's comment, I sort of agree with her. However, we can blame the legislature. I mean, the legislature is obviously doesn't want all those little nasty details out right now. That's why they're, as opposed to prior enacting, having that specifically stated. I think we don't want to lose, I don't think we want to lose sight of the unit cost. Because it's a big issue with, declining enrollment. And obviously you can pad, or not pad, but you can very comfortably maintain some rate of increase because you have less students, but the cost for each student goes up. So I think we're only fooling ourselves if we don't keep some sight on what the unit cost is. And maybe this year with that legislation out there, people are reading in the newspaper if they're reading. Maybe we'll kind of forget it for a year or whatever, but I agree with Liz that it's an important number.
And I'm thinking more about the context that H42 sort of got to the point where it is now. I believe I'm understanding it right, that VSBA, Vermont School Boards Association, and VSA, Vermont Superintendents Association, perhaps other organizations, advocated pretty strongly. So this was legislation that was being contemplated anyway for future action. The pressure was take action right away in the session to make this happen in time for this upcoming town meeting, because we're seeing statewide higher than normal cost per pupil, and having just the cost per pupil and your overall expenses on a ballot tells about this much of the story. So when you have these alarming figures out there that most people don't really understand the story behind them, it does as much to misinform as it does to inform. So I think there's an onus if we're going to continue to put that figure out to educate people on the bigger story behind it and why that is. And I think that was sort of why that got rushed and sort of tagged on to another bill.
You look at our neighbors to the west, Addison Northwest is looking at an 18.21% increase in their spending per pupil. That's without funding a bond. And in our structure. That is going to be a tough ask if that's on their ballot when they're cutting everything they possibly can.
Liz, is that a new hand?
No, I think it's the same one.
Well, we can certainly lean on the state's action to take it off, to not mention it, and just see what happens. If there's a big reaction and people are thinking there's foul play or something, obviously we have the state to lean back on, and we can put it back on there next year.
Well, we can include it in the chair letter too. an
I would
explanation, and
assume it
then,
was gonna be in our informational session and
Yeah,
will be
right.
in our
right.
Flyer.
Our flyer, right. we
It
can
just
put
won't be on the warrant.
on the ballot, whether you're used to seeing that, but when it switched to equalized people, they weren't happy about that, so I remember that, when it got added, they were.
It might be
First year it was
helpful,
like, why is that there?
yeah,
That's,
it might be helpful to have a preamble in on our flyer or on at our informational session about the Lincoln issue and the fact that we don't have apples and apples to make that comparison.
Mhm.
Otherwise, I'm good to go.
Okay, well, then we need a motion to adopt the FY 24 school budget with the chosen number on the expense number included.
You have to, let me share my screen again.
So, sure, I have them written down. I mean, they're two separate.
Yeah, put up the second screen, okay, summary.
I think that's a good number to share, that 4.1. You know,
Yeah.
that, I think that's accurate. It's reflective of what's really going on.
Oops. There it is.
So I make a motion to adopt fiscal year 24 budget, proposed budget number of $33,868,900.
That's Steve. Okay, is there a second? Be brave.
I'll second it. It's fine.
All right. Sarah?
Sarah.
Sarah Lopez. Any discussion?
So just to be clear, we get for that the ability to fix the roof.
or another big project that needs
Okay.
fixing.
Penny,
Which is
so-
what we set ourselves up for when we did not opt for other alternatives. That we have to fix our problems, and this is a problem. And it is coming around the bend quick, and it's gonna be challenging to face it later if we don't have the money beforehand, which we've learned from, to ask for it later. Okay, instead of asking for it later.
And just to be clear, that's assuming our cost estimates are in the ballpark. They're not bids yet. We've learned there's a difference.
What's the age on the roof? This is, no,
It's probably 50,
No.
50 plus.
no, it's like,
A year or two away from the end of its projected life.
this is not fixed asset.
Some parts
tried,
are
yeah.
older than others.
I was gonna say, and you can phase the work.
There's other things we can do that are
Do it all.
So it's time-
helpful, like solar panels and all that stuff.
Right, and that's the beauty of a
Yeah.
possible bond is we
Right.
gather those projects together. And then with the Affordable Inflation Care Act that recently came through. That's not the right title, but
Inflation
As a-
Reduction Act.
Inflation Reduction Act, yes, that we as a nonprofit can request the same tax credits that for-profit companies have been getting for energy efficiency. So there's an opportunity in bundling them correctly twofold. One, better interest rate on a bond, and two, leveraging those funds.
Let me see what else is up there, just in case. Sorry.
Any board members online have any discussion? No, no. All right.
If there's no more discussion, all those in favor of adopting the FY 24 school budget, total expenses in the amount of 33,868,900, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Those abstaining?
I'll abstain. I totally, I just want to say, I think, thank Floyd and Patrick for a great presentation. I don't have anything really against, the budget as proposed. Although I do hope that next year there's more robust, board participation in developing the budget rather than talking about it in, over 2 or 3 board meetings. So I'm just going to abstain.
So the motion passes. All right. Originally, we were gonna table items C and D, but it sounds like instead of approving the warning for item C, we could give some direction on what we're looking for in the warning.
Can I pause for a minute?
Yes.
I think we can excuse Isabel.
Okay.
Don't ever say that by 9 o'clock.
You're
Please
free to
don't
go.
ever hesitate to leave. You should not be.
All right.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you.
And Mom, who had to wait.
Yes, thank you.
No.
Yeah, I think so. Okay. All right. So anyway, as I was saying, rather than approving the warning, if we wanted to give some direction, that would probably help prepare for the meeting on Monday when we're going to need to take some action.
And I have sort of a series of items that I can kind of walk you through
Okay.
that will help offer some direction. One of the ones I sent an email out to kind of get you thinking about Australian ballot versus floor voting. So part of H42 enables you to, as you have the last 2 years, have everything voted from the floor without having warned a vote to have people vote on voting from the floor. If you can follow that logic. So the question is, do you want to do that, or would you prefer to go back to the way we used to do it, which is we have a series of articles that we wrote from the floor and others that we vote by Australian ballot.
That's what I would.
Confused. Wait, we can
So-
vote for the school budget on the floor?
No.
No.
Okay.
So you can vote everything by Australian ballot, including who's going to be voted in as clerk and treasurer and what they're going to get paid. The one thing you probably still have to vote from the floor is to elect a moderator, because the moderator that was elected has resigned because she's now on this board. And so if you elect someone through Australian ballot, you're not going to have a moderator for your annual meeting. So that's probably the one you kind of have to vote from the floor, but the rest could be by Australian ballot. Or, so again, right now, as it stands, the articles to be voted on by floor vote at the annual meeting are electing a moderator, electing a clerk, electing a treasurer, establishing the salaries for the elected officers, to hear and act upon the reports of the school district directors and officers, discuss the articles to be voted on by Australian ballot, transact any other business, and then to adjourn the meeting. Those are articles 1 through 8. All of those, again, except probably article 1, which is electing a moderator, could be moved to Australian ballot. And that enables essentially everyone it becomes effectively an informational meeting instead of a meeting where action is taken. So everybody can be on Zoom.
Which is the way we did it the last couple.
Right. People on Zoom cannot vote on floor votes. Only people who show up in person can vote on floor votes.
I thought we talked about this already. Maybe we
Well,
didn't make
under a different
decision.
context, we talked about it in terms of so you couldn't, that wasn't an option for the upcoming election,
Mhm.
but you could have warned a vote in the upcoming election to make the decision to have everything happen by Australian ballot going forward.
Right.
H42 now allows you, if you wanted to vote everything by Australian ballot this coming town meeting day.
Right, that's what changed.
That's what changed, and
It
that's what
wasn't,
we
it
just
wasn't
need to decide.
available in the prior conversation. Now it is.
Oh, I mean, I don't know if that changes our sentiments we expressed last time, which way. Well, what I thought I heard most folks were saying, let's keep the floor votes as they are and the Australian ballot as it is.
And that's how the draft warning sits now, but I didn't want to
Gotcha.
not have the conversation and get that direction.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
So I guess the advantage to do all Australian ballots is you potentially could cast a wider net for people to become involved. Other than that, there's.
Otherwise, it's the
same
12 or
old, same
15 or
old.
20 people that show up that are making the decisions in Articles 1 through 8.
And I'm not sure how much wider a net it casts, because some people didn't vote on it because they didn't know what it involved, because they didn't have that information from the informational meeting saying, this is the stipend we pay board members, this is the stipend we pay the treasurer. They didn't know that, so they just didn't vote. So I'm not sure without that piece of information that you gather, you might catch some, but you're not educating people.
Yeah.
I think if it's an informational meeting only, it just doesn't feel as important to attend. I don't know
Yeah.
if that's accurate, but in my brain, that's kind of what I'm
Well,
thinking.
that's what we heard from some people, that because we weren't voting on anything on the floor, that it was, what was
Kind
the
of a
sense?
pointless meeting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can just read this, whatever, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's nice to kind of go back to pre-COVID protocol in some regard, regardless of what it is, just to kind of get back to kind of a historical. approach.
Okay, good, so I think that's pretty clear. It
Yep.
sounds like, are you, Aaron and Liz and Brad, you good with that? I see thumbs,
Yep, yes.
thanks, all right, so that's clear.
So another one I would need direction on, in the budget presentation, the recommendation was to apply the fund balance to the capital reserve. We would need to have an article that says, and we've had this on past annual meetings. To have the voters authorize putting money into the capital reserve fund. So that full fund balance of 438,000 or whatever that was. Is that something that the board wants to move forward with?
I think that's kind of. implied
Yes.
by our-
I thought so too, but I
Yeah.
just wanted to get
Just clarity.
confirmation. And then sort of the flip side, that's putting money into the capital reserve. The flip side is, does the board want to go with Dina's recommendation to have an article that transfers money from capital reserve to the general fund? And I will say, in talking with Dina, the question was, can we have this as a not to exceed rather than a specific number? So not to exceed 1.7 million in the event that we find ourselves at the end of this year having a fund balance that we can apply and then reduce the amount we would take out of the capital reserve. So that gives us some flexibility. So we can take out up to what we need to cover everything. And if we can take out less, then we would take out less. And she said, that's fine. You absolutely can have a not to exceed number.
On the flip side, if you just took out the amount, regardless of what it is, in reality, you'd have some flexibility to use that money for something else, right?
The way it would work here, because of the way it's structured, because it's going into the general fund, the potential there, if we could do something else with it, and if in the end, if we couldn't get something done, we couldn't get contractors, whatever, we couldn't spend the money, it contributes to the fund balance
For next year.
that we put into whatever we do with it the following year.
But it's not accessible for that window of time, right? Because it wouldn't be a fund balance until the year ends, and then you'd be voting to put it in 2 years later.
It's that 1 year scale.
Sure, but let's just say you move the money to the general fund. And your construction budget was short 20 grand. You've got this money in your general fund now, don't you?
Right. But what you don't have is, if you don't need it, you can't access it in 25.
Right, if you don't access it this year, you can't access it next year, but you could the following.
and leaving.
Which may not be a huge deal depending on how much money we're talking about.
Right.
I mean, it would almost be kind of the same thing if you put,
It comes out of the wash eventually.
It does come all out, but it gives access to it in that intervening year. Should there be a reason for it?
Yeah, if it stays in the capital reserve funds,
you can vote.
you can go to the voters and get money and do something with it
Okay,
whenever you
all
need
right,
to.
that's fine.
I also think that it, like, politically sending a better message to people being like, we're only gonna take what we need. We're gonna leave the rest. Then there wouldn't be any questions of, well, where did it go? Why can't we use it? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's always, when you're doing that, to see, well, how'd you come up with that number? You know, why isn't it the number you really need, you know,
Yep.
kind of thing
Well, we
sometimes too,
learn.
so.
Yeah,
Run into that before.
Yep.
But
that's a good point.
anyway, not to exceed fine with me.
Does that work for everybody else?
We have a couple of articles that we know we need more conversation on. And then the language around, I guess we need to make a decision on. And again, not a final decision, but in terms of informing the draft that you'll see at the next meeting. Language around cost per pupil or no cost per pupil. We can't really do the increase year over year from an expense perspective. Like what other information beyond the bare minimum requirement would read something like, and this assumes the governor signs it into law. Shall the legal voters of the Mount Abraham Unified School District approve the school board to expend 33 million, that number, which is the amount the school board has determined to be necessary for the 23-24 school year. That's what's required if the governor signs this, nothing more. What you are allowed to put in, I'm sure there are some limits, but I think you have some latitude to add to that. Cost per pupil. Tax rate gets tricky because it's different town by
It's
town,
different by town, different by.
and there are a lot of other factors.
What are other towns doing? I know that's
Yeah,
what
other areas doing. I think we should ask them.
It's in flux right now because of the timing of when
They're asking
boards
the
are
same
adopting
question.
budgets and adopting warnings and the signature from the governor.
And we.
What I'm hearing is a lot of folks are interested in particular places, so places that have never really had trouble passing budgets. Like, well, what, and if their percent increase is 6 or 8 or 9%, like, we're just letting it ride, we're not really too concerned. Other places that have struggled, if this is something that helps, they're, I think, excitedly awaiting the governor's signature. And I'm hearing more in that camp in terms of just as we were talking about doing tonight, but aren't prepared to, like, adopting warnings that take advantage of this legislation and assuming the governor signs it.
I think conversations with a couple of business managers, they're using the year over year total spending, which isn't a
Helpful
number that
either.
we have.
Yeah.
Right.
And I would support that if we had that figure to show. I think that's something that's reasonable. It gives people some basis of comparison. It just doesn't work for us this year. Next year it will.
So
And
I
I think we
would,
keep it
I would
simple.
be fine with going with what the legislature says.
Yeah.
For this year.
I think so, because it seems like we're in that, it's a big number. No, we know why it's that way. But yeah, it would take a long time to sit with every single person as they vote and explain why it's really actually okay.
Oh, Liz,
There was a number that Floyd had mentioned earlier. You said 4 something, was it, that you said was really reflective of what was going on? What were you referring to?
The tax rate increase, I just picked Bristol
Oh,
for, I think it was 4.7% increase in the tax rate.
Unfortunately,
So
it's different for each town and it's also different whether your income. So
Right.
you can't really put a number to it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I
Right.
agree.
That's a good number.
Yeah, your basic tax increase would be, if it was one for everybody. it'd be great.
The only thing we could show is the education rate before CLA, before any of that other stuff. Which even still you have
Nobody-
income sensitized, which
Nobody gets that.
exactly, exactly.
They're not putting what it is. I see.
I always, when those numbers come up, I always wait for the next, the next slide.
Yeah, that's, you might notice I go pretty quickly past that one because I know it's like, What are we talking about in dollars? That's what people pay attention to, yeah.
But it might mean something to people who are looking for the per pupil and don't see it, right? So is it possible, I mean, do you feel it would be more confusing to the extent where it couldn't be there? Or because I support not putting the per pupil on and following that line of thinking. Well, I don't know. Just trying to find a way to have some information. And if not, if we just put the amount and that's that because of all the changes in the district, that's completely fine with me. But just as long as our informational flyer gets some of this other stuff out there in the chair letter, that would be great.
We can put whatever we want on
Right.
that, pages of stuff.
Slide 14 shows your homestead tax rate, which is before adjustments for CLA, which drives the difference. And you could show that last year at 1.4898, this year 1.4804. But I would say showing a decrease in that number isn't necessarily reflective because the taxes are gonna go up, right? And you wanna explain that to everybody, all that? Yeah,
Right, you said,
right. But it is a pretty static number. And it's not, it compares annually to annual.
I think, I think that telling that story, Liz, is important for those that would want to hear it. And so what we put out to the community, I think, can include that information. And Don pulled up a link for the Burlington School District that has some good FAQs and talks about the per pupil spending. So I think once we get past this, the warning language itself, I think it would be worth taking a few minutes to talk about how we're going to get that information out.
Right, which is typically what we do in February. We plan for, in the first, we can plan for the annual meeting and how we're gonna get the
Materials.
flyers out ahead of that.
and that was the last piece I needed for the warning at this point.
So is everybody okay
So-
with just going with the state's minimum?
And then providing more of a narrative than the information that goes out.
I'm seeing thumbs.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So regardless, our ballot can be right. So we have a lot of things.
Well, we'll have two ballots, right? Because you can't put
We'll have lots of them.
the separation question with the district questions, right?
Right, I've got to work with Dina to figure out more about exactly how that needs to function, because that's going to be 5 different warnings. 4 different.
All right.
So many boxes to imagine.
So we have this as an action item. So if somebody would be willing to make a motion to give direction as stated around the warning, the language for the warning, then we can, that we just gave Patrick through our thumbs. Because we were gonna table it, but I
This
sort
is
of,
D.
this is C, the warning, because the warning will inform the ballot writing. So we gave direction on
I
the
make a
warning.
motion that we give Patrick partial direction on the warning.
Okay. All right,
What do you mean? Oh,
as stated.
As
stated,
as
okay.
just discussed.
got it.
Kind of go back through all of that.
Yep.
If that feels too vague from an action perspective, if you wanted to just table it, I have the information I need for you to see a draft that's going to be acted on later. So I don't know if that simplifies things or not.
I amend my motion to table
All right,
action on the warning until our next meeting.
all right. Steve is tabling, are you gonna do C and D?
C and D.
So table C and D.
Because we don't have.
Right, because the
Ballot.
warning,
They're-
without the
they're-
warning, you can't do the ballot.
So we can't do it. Okay.
Exactly the same.
Steve made a motion to table.
I
Bailey,
second it, or Bailey did.
Bailey, all right, any further discussion? All right, all those in favor of tabling action
Or item C and D, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, I'm seeing thumbs online. Any opposed? All right, that one passes. All right, update community engagement committee.
We don't have an update, but Erin and Liz, if you could just get back to me on when you think we might, I sent you an email, so you don't need to respond now, but when we might have our next meeting, because it conflicts with, it turns out our first February board meeting is when we would normally have the community engagement committee meeting. But I did want to ask, you mentioned, Dawn, about information regarding the budget going up to the community, and we would be talking about that at our February meeting. That's February 7th. And our annual meeting is February 28th, and we have Feb break. So is that enough time? And I'm kind of asking also because I'm wondering if there are a couple of people who might want to volunteer to help get that information together, come up with an FAQ and put it out, because I think that's important communication, but I don't know that the community engagement committee has the capacity to do that.
And we have a draft flyer like what we put out in the past with some updated figures.
Right.
That can be a starting point. We can always tweak that,
Mhm.
add some of the stuff we talked about tonight.
So I guess the first question is waiting until this February 7th to plan how that information is going to go out too late?
Yeah. We could,
I mean, I'm proposing that maybe there's a work group of several people that could get together to think about it. And maybe, work on a draft of some materials. I just am concerned that if we wait until February 7th to decide we're gonna do that and decide what's gonna be in that material, that it would be too late.
well, one way or another, we have to meet on Monday. Because we have to do these warnings and the ballots, so. If maybe we can come with some ideas about what to put in the flyer and share them then, and then start the work that way.
We could
Key
share out
point-
what we have.
Right, key points of
ASAP,
information.
and I've been working on that. Just to get people thinking about it rather than reinvent the wheel.
That'd be helpful.
So we're gonna talk about it as a board and not a work group, or maybe both.
Yeah, typically we just tweaked it a little and the staff
Yeah,
of
I
the
guess that's
central
the
office,
question I've got is, do we need a working group to put out a flyer that we always put out?
right,
Okay.
that's.
To me, the
typically-
FAQ piece was the one where,
Okay.
like the
Well,
flyer,
because
I
we
think,
have the informational meeting, we have the annual meeting where we have to talk about it.
I was trying to remember.
We
if
have
we
this
had
one
patch.
flyer, but then like Dawn does a chair letter and there's the meeting, and I don't know, there's just different ways that I think we typically communicate to people about the budget. So if we don't need a group, awesome, but I just want to make sure we're doing a good job communicating about it. So we can talk about it all together. Or we can smaller.
I'm wondering, would it be helpful if we sent the flyer before Monday?
Maybe that link.
Folks can see the flyer, see what's in there, what seems to be missing if that doesn't tell the story.
Yes.
Like, could we make the flyer meet our needs or not? If
Mhm.
not, an FAQ might be something we need to develop in conjunction with
I
the
think
flyer.
that's a good idea.
Sounds good.
Thank
So if
you.
we send that out by the end of the day, Friday, that gives folks the weekend ahead of Monday, is that okay? Does
Yep.
that feel reasonable, Floyd? Yeah, okay.
And the FAQ could be a link on the flyer.
We do send that out hard copy,
I understand.
but we could do both.
So
I
at
think we could do
least be
both.
hitting the people who aren't necessarily online
Yeah.
with the basic information.
And then
They
sort of
could
a
ask
go
a loved
here.
one to go to the link if they needed to, or.
Yep. Yep.
Sort of thing.
Would the board be interested And Krista, what do you think about the community engagement group, bringing it to them and seeing if there's anything? I know we're kind of, it would be a topic switch, but see if any community members had any other ideas about what they might like to see. I don't know how hard it is to throw together a thought exchange or if we still have that service. But maybe that's something that we could bring to that group and see if they have any additional ideas for us. Does that make any sense?
That would be, that would be limited to how do we put out the information. We could see that evolving into how do we change the number we agreed on.
I mean, I love the idea. I think we're just sort of dealing with the time crunch and not kind of the problem of not having done the earlier work of engagement. So, yeah. It feels like a communication need at this point. Like it's what information do we want to get out and what should it say and where should it go? And not an engagement thing. And I think the engagement committee has got some other things they're thinking about. So I was just suggesting that if we want to make sure what we put out is going to meet our community's needs, yeah, make sure we have enough time to talk about that.
Well, I like Patrick's idea of sending out what we get. And then Monday, since we gotta meet Monday, we could have an agenda item to discuss it as a group.
That's good.
All right. Okay. We have an executive session at the end of the meeting and it's a two-parter. Only one is listed on it, but before we do that, I'll just check with public comment because when we come back to the regular meeting, we'll just be doing our self-evaluation, talking about who's doing the meeting highlights, Sarah LaPearl for this meeting. And then adjourning. So is there any, we only have people online. Is there any public comment from people online?
I think the hand is a cursor, right?
Yeah.
I think so.
Sorry, yes.
All right, I don't see any, so there's no public comment. All right, so as I said, we need an executive session. It's a two-parter. The one part is one VSA 5313A13, which is an evaluation of an employee. It's our superintendent check-in. And the other one is one VSA 5313A1D, which is a grievance discussion. So we'll have Patrick join us, obviously, for the first part. I think we can send our minute taker on her way and Floyd can go on his way and then we'll just come back and finish up our evaluation and adjourn. And then Katrina too. And Toto too. And Toto too. All right. So again, we have to determine that speaking about these topics in public session would put us at a disadvantage. So first of all, we never talk about employees in public session, so there's our disadvantage. And the other one is, a grievance in process we don't talk about. Again, same employment records, employment information we don't talk about executive session. So we need a motion for the premature knowledge and then a motion to go in executive session.
To make a motion that would be put us at a disadvantage.
All right, Steve. And Bailey, 1 second. All right, any discussion? All those in agreement that discussing the two topics I said, I don't want to say them again, would put us, discussing them in public session would put us at a disadvantage, please say aye.
I
Any opposed? No abstentions. All right, so that passes. Given that knowledge,
make a motion and go into executive session.
all right, and
I'll
invite
second.
Patrick. All right. Sarah?
Oh,
It was Kristen. All right. At 9:28. All right, all those in favor of going into executive session? For the two reasons I stated, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right,